Welcome back to None of Projects. Today we are working on a new one. This is a 2006 Audi A4 Quattro with a 6-speed manual. It's got some issues. Let's look under the hood real quick. There's some stuff missing. The engine was pulled before we got our hands on it, so it's going to be a little bit of an interesting one. Lots of puzzles to piece back together, but it is a pretty sweet car. Let's take a quick look at the interior. This thing was top of the line back in its day. Well, it's not the S4, but it is S-line. It's got navigation. Again, 6-speed manual Quattro, so probably a bunch of fun to drive. It's got the 3.2 V6, the infamous rear timing chains, so we'll be dealing with that. This thing's in really good shape, and supposedly all the parts are here. We got all kinds of parts in the back seat. Dirty. Car's in pretty good shape overall, minus the front fenders, which we were able to find replacements for. Windshield's cracked, but other than that, it's in pretty good shape. So let's start digging into the motor and see what we got to do to it. All right, so here's our engine, which has already been a little bit messed with. Nobody's torn into it actually yet, except for leaving the valve covers off. So we're gonna have to do a really good job cleaning everything, but everything's got to come off anyways. So in typical European fashion, there is a lot of junk all over this engine. So we're gonna have to try to remember how all this stuff goes. And it is a direct injection motor, so we have all these fuel hard lines and stuff going from the fuel pump. So pretty much we just got to start peeling stuff away. Our goal is to get the cylinder heads off, because allegedly this thing has a blown head gasket. We're gonna pop the heads off and hopefully get the full story. So let's start peeling stuff away. So ordinarily, obviously, when you're working on an engine, you get it up on an engine stand that kind of attaches to the bell housing area. And that makes it a lot easier to work on the engine because you can rotate it around and not have to sit on the ground. This has the timing chains in the back, because why not? And we're gonna have to get back here. So obviously if we attach our engine stand back here, we're gonna just have to take it back off. So I couldn't find a good way to really mount it. I'm sure you could make like a plate that goes off the side of the engine, but we're just gonna work on the floor. Because who doesn't love the thrill of being crushed by an engine? Another typical German thing is that everything is plastic and it gets brittle with heat and age, so we gotta be really careful not to break anything. Especially all the emissions lines and stuff. It's becomes kind of a nightmare trying to track that all down. Luckily these are round in the junkyard, so it's not such a huge deal, but obviously you want to break as little as possible. Okay, so I think we'll start trying to take our lower intake manifold and the injectors out. So on this engine, definitely bag and tag the bolts is the way to go, because there's a lot of miscellaneous length bolts that definitely are not super obvious somewhere to go. Or you can leave them in the intake or whatever, but sometimes they'll fall out, and then it's not fun figuring it out. Alright, so here's our high pressure fuel feed. And I'm just going to screw these all back into their places. And this one, I believe, is the feed from the tank, so the low pressure feed that the high pressure fuel pump takes and pressurizes. Alright, so we have these little clamp things that hold the intake and fuel rail down. I think it'll just pop right up now. Just double checking for any bolts we may have missed. There we go. There we go. So this went in, I believe, like so. And this is the driver's side. Looks like you can tell because it bends out. It's always good to kind of think about these things as you disassemble, because it helps keep it in your mind how these things go back together. If you can't figure it out while you're taking it apart, then you want to mark it, because you're definitely not going to be able to figure it out when you put it back together. Alright, so now we will pull back the wiring harness. So we'll just disconnect all of our fuel injectors. And they're labeled, which is nice. Plus the wiring harnesses usually, no matter how bad they look, they're usually not too bad, because they kind of have a memory of where they are. So they just kind of lay right back in. Sometimes these clips get a little hung up and you gotta help them with a pick. One that's not bent, preferably. Alright, so here is our passenger side harness for the fuel injectors. Then we'll just remove the driver's side also. So on our passenger side head, we're pretty much ready. We could pull the intake manifold as it is, but it's kind of annoying to get to. So I think we'll do it on the bench. Last thing we gotta do is get our timing chain disconnected over here. So we have this access cover on the rear. And then we'll probably pull the cam sprockets, and that will free us. Let's probably silicone down, we're gonna pry it off. Okay. Looks nice and clean in there, which is a good sign. This is a fairly low mileage motor from what I remember. But on higher mileage motors that maybe weren't taken care of so much, you'll see a lot of oil varnish or even sludge in some cases. Looks like we're missing a bolt here, which means somebody's been monkeying around in here. Wonder if they did the timing chain at some point. So these are held on with triple square bolts, which luckily I have. So it looks like the cam bolts are 14. So we'll see how easy this comes out. Should zip right off. Okay. These are likely torque to yield, but we'll see. Which means we're gonna have to replace them. So these should pull off now. We are going to be fighting our tensioner. So we'll pull that back a little bit. There's probably a proper procedure for this, but that's how we're going to do it. Okay, and we're going to reuse these because they're probably still fine. These are the VVT phasers. So the inner ring in here, which is attached to this, will rotate separately from the part that the cam bolts to, and that's how it adjusts the cam timing. These are super expensive to replace, and they don't really go bad on these as far as I know, so not worth it to replace, in my opinion. So now we can remove the upper tensioner, which is just held on with these. This is the part that is very known to go bad on these, and probably they've been replaced before, because you can see how they're much cleaner than the other one. So this at some point was probably having some rattling, and if you ignore it on these, what happens is the tensioner fails, which means the timing chain fails, which means big bad stuff happens in there. Valves hit piston. Very expensive, but that's not what we got going on, so We're going to be replacing all the timing components just as a matter of course because we're in here and it's a known issue on these. We're not going to be using a genuine set because a genuine set, even without any of the sprockets and stuff, is like $1,400, which, I mean, the car's not worth enough to put that in. So this tensioner, not only does it have a little bit of spring tension, but it's also fed by oil pressure. You see there's a little check ball in there. But this is obviously not a genuine tensioner, which is okay. But it also kind of looks like an eBay special tensioner, which is maybe also okay, but questionable. So if you come in from this side, you can start to see the timing chain madness we got going on inside. We have a sprocket, and then we have more hiding behind the covers. But this should allow us to get the cylinder head off. So we are gonna have to remove the cam cap or upper valve or lower valve cover or whatever you want to call it, because the cams hide access to our head bolts down there. Actually, we may be able to get to them. Should have rotated the engine first because it looks like if you rotate it right, you don't have to remove them. But yeah, if we rotated the cam, we wouldn't have to deal with it. But at this point, we don't want to risk bending any valves, so we're just going to pull that. It should be pulled anyways because it probably ought to be resealed. And I just noticed we're missing a bolt right there. Just about. Okay, so this is silicone down, so he's gonna pry it up and break the seal. Luckily, they give us a pry point. Okay. We'll take the cams out. Actually, we'll take a quick look at our bearing surfaces, which have a little bit of scoring, but totally reusable. Cam journals look okay also. Alright, so now we have access to all of our head bolts. We just gotta loosen them all, and then also these torques we have up front, or up on the back. Then the head will come right off. Let me guess, these are some kind of special head bolt, or special bolt side. I wonder if they're like spline or something weird. Let me check. Alright, so this uses a poly drive socket for the head bolts for whatever reason. Currently don't have that, but I think we can make a T55 work. And these, it's not like we're reusing these bolts, so as long as we can get them out, that's fine. I think this will tap right in. Alright, let's see. Hopefully we didn't just make our lives harder. Yeah, that'll work. Cylinder head number 1 is free, so it still has the exhaust manifold on it, obviously, and I forgot a bolt. Uh-oh. Let's look under here. Nothing super weird. We'll give an in-depth look here in a little bit. The reason I said uh-oh is that. I don't know. Okay, that's coolant, so it's not such a huge deal. I was worried it was water. And water would rust, obviously. These bores are really weird looking. I don't know if they're supposed to look like that. Usually, you either have kind of a dull look with crosshatch visible, or you have kind of like a glazed mirror kind of look in a really worn engine. But this is just weird. I don't know. It's probably supposed to be like that for some reason that I don't know. We don't see any bore scratching or anything. There's like a little bit of a witness mark there, but can't feel it. So it's probably totally fine. And I really don't want to touch the bottom end on this thing, so we're not going to. Let's look at our head gasket and see if we see any obvious signs of blown. I think he was saying, the guy who took this apart and who we picked this up off of, was saying that it wasn't overheating or anything, it was just consuming a little bit of coolant. Or maybe it was pressurizing a little bit. I don't remember exactly. That's weird. Somebody's had to have been in here before us, right? Can't imagine that's factory. So I don't see any obvious signs of a blown head gasket on this. What we're gonna do is we're gonna check both heads for flatness. And if they're not flat, obviously we'll get a meld. Let's take a look at our deck. Nothing weird on that, so interesting. Okay, so I'm going to pull the other side, bring you guys back, and then we will see if maybe that cylinder head has an obviously blown head gasket. If not, if it has an obviously blown head gasket, and then we'll go from there.
Shooting ProRes, good. Okay.
Alright, so both heads are off. This one is about the same story. No obvious issues with the head gasket. So we're going to check flatness with our straight edge. That looks fine by eye, but we'll check it with our feeler gauge. I don't know what the spec is, but I figure it can't be less than a couple thousandths. So if it pulls the straight edge, then we know there's less than whatever feeler gauge you're testing of warp. Oh, we're sitting on a piece of junk. Yeah, this doesn't look to be warped at all. So we'll check the other head. Who knows? You can never really trust the story you hear on this kind of thing. So it could just have been a misdiagnosis. I don't even know. But if the heads are flat and we'll visually inspect for any cracks, we can always get it pressure tested by a machine shop, which might be a reasonable way to go. But yeah, I'll check the other head and we'll see. Let's get I guess what would be the timing cover on this off, and we'll get a look at the rest of our chain setup. I don't expect that any of it will be non-OEM because you got to pull the motor to change any of it, or the transmission. So let's find out. Also got a rear main seal here, which is damaged. Possibly just now from pulling it off. Yeah, I don't think it was like that before. Luckily we got a new one. This looks like a PTFE seal, Teflon. And here's the timing chain disaster. I don't know, this all looks really new, actually. Usually these plastic guides turn all dark, and that's part of where the issue comes from, is they get all brittle. That's kind of weird. I don't know if that's normal. It's almost like that dowel is ground off a little bit, but it looks factory. So this looks like it's a balance shaft that goes through. Because it's a V6, it's not going to be naturally balanced. This, I'm guessing, is the oil pump. And then we have two intermediate sprockets that go to the cylinder heads. So, I mean, yeah, it's a little bit much, but it's not bad as far as timing chains go. I think Audi's made some worse designs. So looking in our timing cover, everything actually looks brand new, which I wouldn't have expected, but and if it's the same brand as the upper tensioners that were in here, which is IINAA, they're an OEM supplier brand and they're expensive, so we may end up just sticking with that, because I did get a whole timing chain kit, but it's not OEM, and if this is relatively new and it's an OEM kit, I would say it'd be better to stick with this and save the other one for a rainy day. So that's kind of what I'm leaning towards right now. I guess we'll get everything cleaned up. We got a couple things to check on our cylinder heads, just to, as a matter of course, we got to mount, so we're going to want to make sure the valves are sealing correctly. And I'm thinking, if I remember correctly, it's been a couple months. The car's been sitting a couple months, but the previous owner, I think, pulled this out and suspected a head gasket leak because of a misfire code, but no felt misfire, which I don't know why he jumped to the conclusion of a blown head gasket. But so because of that, we're going to want to check that our valves seal properly, because if you have a low compression cylinder because of a leaky valve, obviously that's going to cause issues. All of our cylinder bores look good. I realized they are totally aluminum, so this block doesn't have cast iron sleeves like most engines have. That's why they look so weird. And the thing you got to check for on these, because they're so soft, is any really deep vertical scoring, but there's basically no vertical scoring at all. Definitely nothing that catches a nail or anything like that. So I think we're good to go on the bores. Honestly, I think this engine got pulled for no reason, but time will tell. All right, so we got first head here on the bench. We're gonna go ahead and pull the exhaust manifold so we can see the exhaust ports. And I put some spark plugs in that I had laying around. And we'll top the combustion chambers up with water and see what kind of leak down we get. Now we fill with water. Now I'm not trying to put this forward as a legitimate test. This is kind of an old school, I don't know what you call it, shade tree kind of method. Ideally you'd have this pressure checked or vacuum checked at a machine shop, and that's how they check valve seal. But you can get a good idea. And we know just visually, overfilled a little bit. There's nothing crazy going on, so this will just give us a little bit more information and show us if we have like a hugely leaking valve. Alright, so we're just going to clean up all of our mating surfaces while we wait for parts. Basically everything's just RTV, which is a huge pain, but just elbow grease and a razor blade's the best way I've always found. So yeah, once the parts get here, we will begin reassembly.